Imagine two boys.
Okay.
They were born in completely different places to different families and in totally different circumstances.
Right.
But they share this exact same foundational tragedy, which is a profound, absolute childhood abandonment.
Yeah. The trauma they experience in those critical early years is identical.
Exactly. They're left in this void where a caregiver should be. Now, I want you to fast forward 20 years.
Okay, so they're adults now.
Right. You look at the first boy, and he has grown into a man who is just, well, constantly at war.
Fighting the world.
Yeah. He's prone to these violent outbursts. He treats every single interaction at work or, in relationships like it's a battle for survival.
He operates with this terrifying, explosive volatility.
Yes, exactly. But then you look at the second boy, and he is a complete recluse.
Just totally withdrawn.
Completely.
Yeah.
He avoids human contact almost entirely. He retreats so far inward into his own isolated world that he practically vanishes from society.
He doesn't fight, he hides.
Right. So the core question is, how did the exact same trauma, the exact same void of love and care, produce such polar opposite adults?
It is arguably one of the most compelling and really one of the most haunting mysteries in developmental psychology.
Yeah, I bet.
Because we have this cultural tendency, right, to think of trauma as like a machine in a factory.
Oh, well, like it stamps out a uniform product.
Exactly. We assume that if you put 10 kids through the same terrible experience, you will naturally get 10 adults with the exact same set of neuroses.
Right. But that's not what happens.
Not at all. The reality of human neurobiology is infinitely more complex and, frankly, much more fascinating. The brain doesn't just passively receive trauma.
It does something with it.
It actively calculates a survival strategy based on the tools it actually has available.
Welcome to Today in the Hypothesis, where we take a stack of your sources, articles, research papers, your own notes, and we extract the most important nuggets of insight.
We are exploring the hidden mechanisms behind the things you thought you understood.
Exactly. And today, we are attempting to answer that exact question about those two boys. Our foundational text for this deep dive is a truly fascinating multidisciplinary research paper.
It's by Victor H. Sertouche, synthesized by Gemini.
Right. And it's titled The Temperamental Bifurcation of Trauma. So our mission for today's hypothesis is to map out the biological, the evolutionary, and the cultural switchboards that dictate how abandoned males express their trauma.
Right.
Specifically, we want to look at how an individual's innate baseline temperament, like the wiring they're literally born with, pushes them down either the path of the aggressive warrior or the path of the withdrawn recluse.
And to really grasp the gravity of this research, we have to commit to looking past the surface behaviors,
What do you mean by that?
Well, it is incredibly easy for society to simply judge the aggressive man as like a criminal or a menace.
Sure.
And it is equally easy to just pity the withdrawn man or dismiss him as a failure.
I just write them both off.
Exactly. But we are going to explore the underlying logic of these paths. We are going to look at why these reactions, which seem so destructive to us now, were originally brilliant survival strategies.
Brilliant, but tragic.
Deeply tragic. But they were designed by the brain to keep a child alive in an unlivable situation.
I want to start right at the absolute beginning because I feel like we need to move away from using the word trauma as this abstract clinical catch-all.
Yeah, that word gets thrown around a lot.
It does. So let's look at the physical brain of an infant or a young toddler who is actively experiencing abandonment.
Okay.
When that connection is severed, whether it's physical abandonment like a foundling or just severe emotional neglect, what is the actual mechanical reality happening inside that child's head?
Well, when an infant or a small child is abandoned, the brain registers this event through a very specific lens. The research actually describes it as a fear without solution.
A fear without solution.
Yeah. And to understand the physiological devastation of that phrase, you really have to remember that a human infant is arguably the most helpless creature on the planet.
They literally can't do anything for themselves.
Nothing. They are entirely dependent on a caregiver for core survival. I mean, food, warmth, physical protection, and emotional regulation.
Right.
So when that caregiver vanishes or is, physically present but emotionally a ghost, the child's stress response system goes into a state of maximum alarm.
And when you say the stress response system, we're talking about the HPA axis, right?
That's the core of it, yes. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay, break that down for us.
It is this complex set of direct influences and feedback interactions among 3 endocrine glands. When the infant perceives the threat of abandonment, the hypothalamus in the brain releases corticotropin-releasing hormone.
Yeah.
That hormone travels to the pituitary gland, which then signals the adrenal glands, which sit right on top of the kidneys, to flood the body with cortisol and adrenaline.
So it's a massive chemical dump.
Massive. The heart races, the muscles tense, the breathing becomes shallow. They are biologically primed to fight or flee.
But they can't do either. I mean, they're babies. They can't fight off a predator, and they certainly can't run away to find food.
Exactly. Which is exactly why it is a fear without solution. They are trapped in this biological emergency protocol with no physical outlet.
God, that sounds exhausting.
It is. And over time, as this abandonment continues day after day, this unresolved terror permanently calibrates the HPA axis. The system is just not designed to run at maximum capacity indefinitely.
So it breaks.
It adapts. Depending on the duration and the severity of the neglect, the HPA axis fundamentally alters its baseline. It either results in a state of chronic hyperarousal,
Where they're just always stressed.
right, where the child is perpetually flooded with stress hormones and always scanning for threats, or the system essentially burns out.
Burns out, like
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, resulting in a blunted stress response where they just stop producing normal levels of cortisol altogether.
So the baseline operating system of the brain is just fundamentally physically altered before they even have the language to describe what is happening to them.
Before they can even speak, yes.
But wait, if both boys experience this fear without solution and this HPA axis disruption, how does that lead to the fork in the road? Like, how does one kid become a fighter and the other a hider?
This is where we introduce the concept of innate temperament.
Innate temperament.
Think of temperament as a biological filter that every single human is born with. It dictates how sensitive you are to stimuli, how intensely you react, and how you regulate those reactions.
So it's like the hardware you're shipped with.
Perfect analogy. The research identifies two distinct temperamental profiles that interact with this trauma, and we see the divergence most clearly in the amygdala.
Which is the brain's primary threat detection center.
Exactly. Let's look at the aggressive profile first, our first boy. These are children who are born with a high baseline for reactivity, what the paper casually refers to as a hot temper.
Okay, so hot temper is the everyday phrase, but how does a neuroscientist actually measure that? You can't just write, "He was cranky," in a clinical journal.
Right, they don't do that. In a clinical setting, they look at the physical reactivity of the amygdala. And in these hot-tempered children, the trauma of abandonment paradoxically leads to a hyporeactive or blunted amygdala.
Wait.
Yeah.
If they're aggressive and explosive, shouldn't their threat detector be turned all the way up? Why is it blunted?
It seems totally counterintuitive, right? But think about what the amygdala actually does. It doesn't just process external threats, it processes internal emotional deterrence.
The internal deterrence, like what?
It is responsible for empathy, for the sensation of fear, and for processing social punishment.
Oh?
Because their amygdala is blunted, these aggressive children lack what neurobiologists call the punishment sensitivity system.
Punishment sensitivity. Meaning they don't care if they get in trouble.
It's deeper than not caring. They literally do not feel the physical sensations of fear or social shame in the way a neurotypical person would. Yeah. When they act out, or hit someone or steal something, they do not get that internal physiological rush of guilt or anxiety that tells the rest of us to stop.
That is a wild concept. So
Oh.
they are basically operating without brakes.
Exactly. No breaks.
What about the other profile then? The second boy who becomes the recluse.
The withdrawn profile operates on the exact opposite neurobiological extreme. These children are born with a more passive, sensitive temperament.
Okay.
In their brains, the abandonment trauma results in a hyperreactive amygdala. Their threat detection center is turned up to a deafening volume.
So everything is a threat.
Everything. To them, almost all social stimuli like a loud voice, a crowded room, an unpredictable peer are perceived as overwhelmingly, paralyzingly terrifying.
So if the first boy has no brakes, the second boy has nothing but brakes.
That is a very apt way to describe what researchers call the vagal brake mechanism.
The vagal brake.
Yeah. The vagus nerve is the main component of the parasympathetic nervous system, which controls rest and digestion. It physically innervates the heart and can actually slow down the heart rate.
Okay, so it physically calms the body.
Right. When this hypersensitive child is exposed to the overwhelming chaos of an unreliable world, their nervous system engages this vagal brake hard.
And what does that look like from the outside?
It results in a clinical presentation called infant-sustained social withdrawal behavior. They physically and emotionally shut down.
They just freeze.
They avert their gaze, they stop vocalizing, they become entirely motionless. It is a biological attempt to minimize the physiological and psychological cost of existing in a dangerous environment.
Okay, I want to try and visualize this difference.
Mm,
Let's imagine the brain's threat detection system is like a car alarm.
I like that.
Right. So for the aggressive kid, the first boy, the trauma essentially clipped the wires to the siren. So someone could be smashing the windows, stealing the radio, hot wiring the engine, and the alarm just never goes off. There's no internal warning that something bad is happening or that they are doing something wrong.
Right, complete silence.
But for the withdrawn kid, the second boy, the sensitivity is cranked so high that a single leaf falls on the windshield and the siren blares at full volume all night long.
To take that car alarm analogy a step further, think about what happens to the car's battery if that alarm blares constantly.
It dies. It completely drains.
Exactly. The system exhausts itself. The withdrawn child's nervous system is so constantly flooded by false alarms that the only way to survive is to park the car in a dark, isolated garage and never drive it.
Wow, that's bleak.
And for the aggressive child with the clipped wires, aggression becomes a highly efficient, viable tool precisely because there is no alarm.
Because they don't feel bad about doing it.
Right. If you do not feel the internal emotional penalty of fear or shame that usually stops human beings from lashing out, force becomes the easiest way to manipulate your environment.
Yeah, why wouldn't you use it?
Exactly. The child learns very quickly that aggression gets them what they want, and their brain offers absolutely no resistance to that strategy.
Okay, but that brings up a crucial question. What exactly are they trying to get? I mean, we are talking about toddlers and young children here.
Right.
A baby isn't trying to manipulate an environment for money or power. They are looking for care. They are looking for love. And that brings us to the reward systems in the brain, right?
Yes, absolutely. We cannot talk about the amygdala's threat system without immediately looking at the brain's reward centers because they are deeply interconnected.
How so?
In the context of developmental psychopathology, the ultimate primary biological reward for a human child is parental care, safety, and attention.
Right, that's all they want.
And abandonment is the ultimate catastrophic omission of that expected reward.
And how does the brain process the absence of something it is literally biologically programmed to expect?
It creates a state that researchers call frustrative non-reward.
Frustrative non-reward.
Yeah, and this isn't just a feeling of being, like, a little disappointed. Frustrative non-reward is a specific type of psychological and physiological agony.
Like what? What does it feel like?
Well, imagine being desperately, painfully hungry. You're sitting at a table expecting a meal to be placed in front of you, and the plate is just left empty forever.
Just staring at an empty plate while starving.
Exactly. In the developing brain, this massive chronic omission of expected care triggers severe dysfunction in two key areas. The prefrontal cortex, which handles complex decision-making and impulse control,
Okay.
and the striatum, which is deeply involved in processing rewards and motivation.
Think about the most reactive, hot-headed kid you knew in middle school or high school. The kind of kid who would completely blow up, punch a locker, or start a fight over the tiniest perceived slight or moment of disrespect.
We all knew one.
Right. Are we basically seeing this broken reward system misfiring in real time?
In many cases, yes. Let's look at how frustrative non-reward plays out in our first boy, the irritable, hot-tempered child. Their brains develop a fascinating and tragic malfunction.
What happens?
They show a heightened, almost desperate sensitivity to the anticipation of receiving a reward, whether that is attention, resources, or validation.
Okay.
But crucially, they have a deficient ability to actually learn from the reward when they get it.
Wait, what do you mean they can't learn from it? If they finally get attention, shouldn't their brain register that the reward has been achieved and calm down?
You would think so, but the neural feedback loop is broken. The dopamine pathway that signals reward achieved, we are safe now, is compromised.
So it never registers.
Never. Because they cannot effectively process the receipt of the reward, it becomes an unquenchable thirst.
An unquenchable thirst.
It is like drinking gallons of water, but your body is physically incapable of registering hydration. You just keep drinking, growing increasingly desperate, bloated, and furious that your thirst isn't disappearing.
That sounds like torture.
It is. They want connection and resources desperately, but their broken prefrontal cortex fails to inhibit their impulses, leading to chronic frustration and reactive aggression. The reward never feels secure, so they're always aggressively demanding more.
That is deeply tragic. It is an engine that runs purely on desperation.
Yeah.
But what happens to the second boy, the passive child who experiences the exact same omission of the reward?
For the passive child, the exact same frustrative non-reward results in a completely different neurobiological adaptation. It's called anhedonia.
Anhedonia. Now, that's a term usually associated with severe depression, right? The physical inability to feel pleasure.
Yes. The reward system essentially dampens itself down to zero.
It just turns off.
Exactly. Instead of fighting a losing battle for a reward that never comes, the withdrawn child develops extreme over-control. They retreat completely away from others.
Because it hurts too much to try.
Right. If the act of hoping for a reward, hoping for love or attention brings only the agonizing pain of disappointment, the brain's brilliant self-protective solution is to simply amputate the desire.
Amputate the desire. Wow.
Boys stop wanting. They flatten their emotional landscape so that the peaks of hope can no longer lead to the valleys of abandonment.
It is like they are amputating a part of their own humanity just to survive the environment.
That's exactly what it is.
But looking at these two outcomes, a kid who is a hyper-aggressive, unquenchable live wire, and a kid who has completely shut down their capacity for pleasure, this level of dysfunction seems so maladaptive.
It looks that way to us, yes.
Right, because if this brain wiring creates so much chaos and pain, why did human biology evolve to allow this? Why did nature design a system that breaks so spectacularly?
To understand that, we have to pull the camera way back. We have to shift our perspective from the micro level of neurobiology to the macro level of evolutionary psychology.
Okay, going back to our ancestors.
Yes, we have to remember a harsh truth. Nature does not design human beings for happiness.
Fair point.
And it certainly doesn't design us for modern social harmony. Nature designs exclusively for survival and reproduction. And from an ancestral evolutionary standpoint, these behaviors are not pathological broken machinery.
They aren't.
No, they are highly calculated, highly adaptive responses to a specific environment.
Adaptive. I mean, I struggle to see how throwing a violent tantrum that isolates you from your peers or hiding in a corner so completely that you never interact with anyone can be considered adaptive.
It makes sense when you view it through the lens of life history theory, which is heavily featured in the research paper we are looking at.
Okay, break down life history theory for me.
It's an evolutionary framework that suggests organisms dynamically allocate their biological energy and resources, like growth, reproduction, and somatic maintenance, based on the cues they receive from their environment.
So they adjust based on what's around them.
Right. For a human child, abandonment is not just a sad event. It serves as a massive, blaring environmental cue signaling extreme unpredictability and extraordinarily high extrinsic risk.
Extrinsic risk meaning like the chances of being killed by something outside of your control.
Yes. Predators, starvation, violence, lack of shelter. The abandonment tells the child's developing body, the world you have been born into is incredibly unsafe. Resources are scarce, and your statistical chances of surviving to adulthood are incredibly low.
Let's use an ecological metaphor here. It is the difference between a weed and an oak tree.
Oh, that's good.
Right. An oak tree is a slow strategy organism. It drops an acorn in a stable forest. It takes decades to grow deep roots. It invests massive amounts of energy into building a strong, thick trunk. And it doesn't even think about reproducing for years because it feels secure in its environment.
It expects to be there for a century.
Exactly. A weed, on the other hand, is a fast strategy organism. It sprouts in the crack of a sidewalk where it expects to be stepped on, poisoned, or ripped out at any moment.
Yes.
So it grows incredibly fast, puts all its energy into immediate aggressive expansion, and scatters its seeds as quickly as possible before it gets destroyed.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it. The abandoned child with the hot temper, our first boy, is the weed.
Wow.
The environmental cue of abandonment triggers what evolutionary psychologists call a fast life history strategy. When the environment is that unpredictable, it makes zero evolutionary sense to act like the oak tree.
Because you might not live that long.
Exactly. It is a waste of biological energy to develop slowly, to build long-term trust, to regulate your emotions, or to invest in mutualistic cooperative alliances.
Because nobody's cooperating with you anyway.
Right. Instead, the organism's biology is pushed toward early physical maturation, high risk-taking, and a deeply antagonistic social style.
So the aggression isn't a glitch. It is the entire point of the software.
Aggression is the behavioral implementation of the FAST strategy. When the future is not guaranteed, you use your hot temper to fight for immediate resources.
You take what you need right now.
You take the food, the status, the territory right now by force if necessary because there might not be a tomorrow. You don't trust anyone because you have already learned that there is no protector looking out for you.
Okay, so the first boy is the aggressive weed. Where does the second boy, the recluse, fit into this evolutionary framework? Is he also a weed?
No, the passive child utilizes a different evolutionary strategy entirely, known in behavioral ecology as niche picking.
Niche picking.
Yeah. For the withdrawn child, their baseline temperament doesn't support the high-risk, aggressive, fast strategy. They aren't wired for combat.
Right, they have all those breaks.
Right. Instead, withdrawal becomes a highly specialized defense mechanism against a deeply noxious and threatening social world.
So if they can't fight, their strategy is to become invisible.
Precisely. By moving away from the group, the child avoids the physical and psychological danger of competing in a harsh dominance hierarchy.
Which makes sense.
If you are small, sensitive, and have no parent to protect you, entering the fray of social competition is basically a death sentence in an ancestral environment. Niche picking is camouflage.
And camouflage.
It is finding a dark, quiet corner of the cave and staying absolutely still so the predators don't see you.
I mean, I get it. It's like playing a video game on survival mode.
How do you mean?
The aggressive path is like a speed run, where you just break everything and hoard items to survive right now. But the withdrawn path is stealth mode, where you just hide to avoid taking damage.
That's a great way to put it.
But there has to be a massive cost to that strategy. If you spend your entire developmental window hiding in the back of the cave, you aren't learning how to be a functioning member of the tribe. You miss out on all the experience points and level ups.
And that is the crux of the developmental cascade of maladjustment.
The cascade.
Yes. By maintaining this slow, defensive posture of hiding, they survive the immediate threat of childhood, but they miss out on critical social and cognitive calibrations.
Like what kind of calibrations?
They do not learn how to negotiate with peers. They don't learn how to read subtle facial expressions. They don't learn how to form attachments or regulate minor conflicts.
So they just fall further and further behind.
Exactly. They arrive in biological adulthood fundamentally unequipped for the complexities of human connection. The camouflage works so well that they eventually become invisible even to themselves.
Man. Let's bring these ancient evolutionary programs, the fast strategy warrior and the stealthy niche picker, out of the ancestral cave and put them into a modern context. How do these biological imperatives actually manifest when these two boys reach, say, a modern elementary school playground?
This is where we transition from evolutionary biology to attachment theory.
Oh, attachment styles. We hear about those a lot.
Right. As these children begin to interact with their peers, their early trauma forms what psychologists call internal working models.
What's an internal working model?
This is essentially a subconscious blueprint for how all relationships operate. The passive temperament, our second boy who hides, generally develops an insecure avoidant attachment style.
Let's put him on the playground to see how this works.
Okay.
There's a swing set, and both boys want to use it. How does the avoidant, withdrawn boy handle it?
The avoidant boy looks at the swing set, sees other children there, and his internal working model tells him that engaging with them will only lead to rejection or pain.
Because that's what he learned from being abandoned.
Exactly. So he learns to proactively block his own need for play and connection. He will walk away, go to the far edge of the playground alone, and become determinedly self-sufficient.
He just talks himself out of wanting it.
Yes, he convinces himself he never wanted to swing in the first place.
And the first boy, the aggressive child with the fast life strategy.
The hot-tempered child develops an insecure, ambivalent, or disorganized attachment style. Their internal model tells them that resources are scarce and people are hostile.
So they assume everyone is an enemy.
Right. If he wants the swing, his fear without solution instantly transforms into chronic emotional dysregulation. He doesn't wait his turn or ask nicely. He walks up, shoves the other kid off the swing, and aggressively defends his territory.
He expects a fight, so he starts one.
He expects hostility, so he strikes first.
It creates such a clean binary narrative, doesn't it? Like, you are either the fighter shoving kids off the swing, or you are the hiders standing at the edge of the fence. But the real world is rarely that clean.
And neither is the research, thankfully. In fact, one of the most startling and significant findings in the literature completely shatters this clean dichotomy.
Oh, what did they find?
We have to introduce a third category, an anomaly that the paper highlights, called the active isolate subtype.
The active isolate. Those two words literally sound like an oxymoron. What exactly is an active isolate?
To understand this subtype, the paper references a monumental 30-year longitudinal study conducted by Lansford and her colleagues.
30 years. That's massive.
It's incredible data. They didn't just look at kids on a playground. They tracked these individuals from early childhood all the way into their mid-30s to see how these temperaments played out over a lifespan.
Okay, so what did they see?
They found that a normal, withdrawn child, the one hiding at the edge of the fence, often manages to catch up eventually.
Really?
Yeah, they might be socially awkward, but they usually hit adult milestones like finding a stable job or getting married. But the active isolate child is a different story entirely.
So what makes them different from the normal withdrawn kid?
The active isolate is a child who possesses the hot, explosive temper and the high reactivity of our first boy. But instead of successfully dominating their environment, they are actively rejected and ostracized by their peer group
Because of the anger.
because of their impulsivity, their anger, and their erratic behavior.
Wait, so if we go back to the fork in the road, the path of aggression versus the path of withdrawal, are you saying the active isolate is somehow being dragged down both paths simultaneously?
Tragically, yes. They have the biological drive to engage and dominate, but the environment forces them into isolation.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is, and the statistical findings from the Lansford study regarding this subtype are absolutely chilling.
What do the numbers say?
By the time they reach their mid-30s, active isolates are significantly less likely to be in a stable romantic relationship or maintain stable employment compared to any other group. The researchers actually noted a beta coefficient of negative 1.24 for relationship stability.
With a p-value of less than 0.05. Right, I saw that in the notes.
Yes, exactly.
Let's translate those statistics into human reality. What does a beta coefficient of negative 1.24 actually look like in someone's life?
It means their chances of finding and keeping a stable partnership don't just dip slightly, they statistically plummet.
You just fall off a cliff.
They are in a relationship freefall. In practical terms, it translates to a life of profound, chaotic loneliness. Their social impairment is astronomically worse than someone who is just purely aggressive or purely withdrawn.
Why is the combination of the two traits so much more destructive? Like, why does it compound like that?
Because it creates a self-reinforcing loop of psychological torture. Think about the mechanics of it. Their innate aggression causes them to lash out.
Right.
Society, whether it's the kids on the playground or coworkers in an office, immediately rejects them for that aggression. This rejection forces the active isolate into a state of physical and social withdrawal.
Okay, so they end up alone anyway.
But because they have a hot temper, that isolation does not bring them peace or safety like it does for the passive child. Instead, sitting in that isolation breeds deep, simmering resentment, paranoia, and an even greater sense of frustrative non-reward.
So they get angrier because they are alone.
Yes, they are locked in a room, furious that they are locked in, which makes them bang on the door more violently.
Which only makes society add more locks to the door.
Precisely. When aggression and withdrawal co-occur, the individual is fighting a ceaseless war against a society that they are simultaneously locked out of. It is the most toxic combination of trauma and temperament.
That is absolutely heartbreaking. You have a kid who is angry because they were fundamentally abandoned. Their clumsy, aggressive attempts to get attention push everyone away, and that resulting isolation just rips open the original wound of abandonment every single day.
It's a devastating cycle.
And as these boys grow out of childhood into teenagers and eventually into men, this biological and evolutionary powder keg inevitably collides with the expectations of culture.
This brings us to a critical layer of the analysis, the cultural scripts surrounding masculinity.
Right. Society has a lot of rules for men.
It does. The research paper leans into what researchers call the gender role strain paradigm and the pervasive concept of hegemonic masculinity.
Hegemonic masculinity. We hear that term a lot. But in this context, according to the paper, it means the dominant, deeply traditional expectations of what society dictates a real man is supposed to be.
Exactly. Traditional hegemonic ideals in Western culture emphasize dominance, physical toughness, relentless self-reliance, and most importantly, a strict, almost militant restriction of emotional vulnerability.
No crying, basically.
None. Now take that cultural template and map it onto a young man carrying the profound, unhealed trauma of childhood abandonment.
That's a bad mix.
Deep down, he feels a terrifying sense of inadequacy. He feels unlovable. Researchers call the friction between this internal reality and external expectations masculine discrepancy stress.
Masculine discrepancy stress.
He feels he is fundamentally failing at being a man because he feels broken and terrified inside.
So how does our first boy, the aggressive fast strategy male, resolve that discrepancy? How does culture tell him to fix the fact that he is hurting?
Culture hands him a very specific, dangerous tool. It tells him that the only socially valid or acceptable way for a man to express deep internal distress is through anger, dominance, and control.
Right, anger is allowed. Sadness isn't.
For the hot-tempered male, violence and aggression become compensatory mechanisms. He uses them to aggressively reassert his lost masculinity. If he feels small and abandoned on the inside, he will make himself massive and terrifying on the outside.
Wow.
The hot temper is no longer just a biological reflex from a blunted amygdala. It is now a culturally sanctioned armor used to hide his vulnerability from the world.
It's like society looks at his trauma, sees the aggression, and instead of treating the wound, it hands him a weapon and says, "Good job, that's what men do."
Sadly, yes.
But what does this all mean for the second boy, the passive, withdrawn guy? It sounds like society hands men a very narrow, suffocating script.
Very narrow.
If a guy is naturally quiet, lacks that hot temper, and is just feeling a profound, crushing sadness from his abandonment, the culture almost demands he either magically relabel that sadness as anger or bury it completely.
You have zeroed in on the exact crushing mechanism of restrictive emotionality.
Restrictive emotionality.
The withdrawn male, by virtue of his passive temperament, cannot use aggression to fit the masculine script. He doesn't have the biological drive to dominate.
So what happens to all that pain?
He internalizes it. He turns the aggression inward, which clinically manifests as severe depression and self-isolation. He develops what the paper calls toxic shame.
Toxic shame. How is that different from regular shame?
Regular shame is a feeling attached to an action, like I did something bad.
Okay, I lied or I stole, I feel shame.
Right, but toxic shame is an identity. It's, I am bad, I am fundamentally unlovable, and my abandonment is absolute proof of my brokenness.
Oh, man.
It is a heavy, strangling belief in his own absolute unworthiness. Because society denies him the language to express hurt, fear, or sadness without stripping him of his masculinity, he is forced to wear a mask of total stoicism.
He has to pretend he's fine.
He pretends he doesn't care. But this mask is a prison. It exacerbates his isolation because you cannot form true intimate connections while wearing armor, and it prevents him from ever asking for the help he so desperately needs.
They're essentially trapped in a cultural straitjacket that tightens every time they try to breathe.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
And one of the most mind-bending parts of this research is that these two paths, the aggressive man fighting to prove his worth and the withdrawn man hiding in his toxic shame, aren't just modern psychological concepts cooked up in a lab in the 21st century.
Not at all.
They are literally the oldest stories human beings have ever told.
The paper draws a truly fascinating parallel to mythological archetypes. It argues that these behavioral strategies, the bifurcation of trauma, are so deeply ingrained in the human operating system that they form the bedrock of our ancient myths and storytelling.
Let's look at the first boy through the lens of myth. He represents the warrior archetype. Right?
Precisely. Think of the mythological foundling or the orphan stories like Romulus and Remus abandoned to the wolves, or frankly, countless modern comic book heroes like Batman.
Oh, true. Total orphans.
They suffer an initial devastating trauma of abandonment. They then use what the paper describes as murderously aggressive impulses to conquer the guardian of the cave, which represents the hostile, unyielding society.
Right, they fight their way out.
They fight, they bleed, and they carve out their own kingdom by force. It is the ultimate cultural romanticization of the antagonistic fast life history strategy. We celebrate the boy who turns his pain into dominance.
And the opposite of the warrior, the archetype for our second boy, is the beggar.
The beggar or the holy tramp.
The holy tramp, wow.
The classic example is Oedipus at the very end of his life, blind, ruined, and cast out from the city to wander the wilderness. This archetype represents total societal ostracism.
Being completely cast out.
Yet, mythologically speaking, this extreme withdrawal is often depicted as creating a strange, paradoxical inner power.
Inner power from being abandoned. How?
By accepting total rejection and walking away from the city, the beggar destroys the wall between the private self and the public mask. Because he has nothing left to lose, he frees himself from the exhausting, endless pursuit of societal approval.
There is a really dense philosophical concept mentioned in the sources by the French philosopher René Girard that seems to tie all this together, the concept of mimetic desire. I want to spend some time unpacking this because it feels central to understanding how the abandoned child interacts with society. Like, how do we learn what to want?
Girard's theory of mimetic desire is profound, and it requires a shift in how we think about human autonomy.
Okay.
We like to believe that our desires are authentic and independent. We think, I want that car, I want that job, I want that type of relationship because it suits my unique personality.
Right, because I'm an individual.
Girard argues that this is an illusion. He posits that human desire is not linear, it is triangular.
Triangular.
We do not desire things independently. We imitate the desires of the other. We look to models, parents, peers, society to show us what is valuable.
Okay, let's ground this. Imagine a middle school cafeteria. Our first boy, the aggressive one, is sitting alone. He sees the popular kid wearing a very specific, expensive jacket, laughing with a group of friends.
Perfect example.
According to Girard, what is happening in the abandoned boy's head?
The abandoned child is operating from a place of profound internal lack. He feels a massive void where parental love and security should be.
Right, the frustrative non-reward.
Exactly. He looks at the popular kid in the cafeteria. It is not that he inherently cares about the fabric or the brand of the jacket. He sees that the popular kid possesses safety, status, and the admiration of the group, the very things the abandoned boy lacks.
Ah, I see.
Society, through the model of the popular kid, tells the abandoned boy, this jacket is the marker of worth. If you have this, you are safe. You are loved.
So he mimics the desire for the jacket to try and fill the void.
Exactly. He enters into what Girard calls a mimetic rivalry. He begins to fiercely compete for the markers of autonomy and success that society values.
Okay, but does getting the jacket fix anything?
Here is the tragic catch. Acquiring the jacket will never fill the void of an absent parent. When the object fails to provide the deep psychological safety he actually craves, the rivalry turns antagonistic and bitter.
So he gets angry again.
The boy doesn't just want the jacket anymore. He wants to destroy the model, who has what he can never truly possess.
And that leads to violence.
Girard argues that mimetic rivalry inevitably leads to a cycle of escalating violence and conflict, which must eventually be resolved through a sacrifice or a scapegoat.
A sacrifice? Like who?
For the abandoned youth operating on the aggressive, fast strategy, that sacrifice is very often his own future.
Wow.
The violence escalates. He steals the jacket. He starts a fight in the cafeteria. He attacks the societal models, and the result is his own expulsion, delinquency, or incarceration. He sacrifices himself on the altar of a mimetic desire he could never satisfy.
It is incredibly deep. It's like they are desperately trying to steal the script of a normal, happy life, but the very act of trying to steal it destroys them.
That's a great way to summarize it.
Now, the research paper takes what feels like a wild pivot here, but it actually makes perfect sense. It brings this out of the realm of ancient myth and abstract philosophy and shows how these exact archetypes dictate something incredibly tangible and modern.
Our bank account.
Our bank accounts.
It is where the rubber meets the road in adult life. The psychological trauma of abandonment and the resulting temperamental strategies cascade directly into socioeconomic and financial behaviors.
How direct is that link?
There is a massive body of research showing a proven mathematical dose-response relationship between adverse childhood experiences, what we call ACEs, and adult financial well-being.
A dose-response relationship. So the more trauma you have.
The more chaotic your financial life becomes.
And it splits down those same two temperamental lines, right? We have boy A's bank account and boy B's bank account.
Completely. Let's look at the anxious-aggressive financial pattern first. Men with a hot temper and a history of abandonment often develop an obsessive, hypervigilant need for financial control.
The warrior archetype hoarding resources.
Exactly. They might hoard money, obsessively save every penny, and monitor their bank accounts daily. But ironically, they never actually feel a sense of financial security. The anxiety is always there.
It's the frustrative non-reward again. The money doesn't quench the thirst.
Exactly. And in relationships, this often morphs into financial abuse.
Oh, really?
For the aggressively narcissistic profile, holding the purse strings becomes a literal mechanism to hold the heartstrings. They use financial dominance, controlling the credit cards and the bank access, to ensure that their partner is completely dependent on them.
So they can't leave.
It is a maladaptive way to guarantee that nobody can ever abandon them again.
And the withdrawn pattern, boy B's relationship with money, is the polar opposite.
The avoidant withdrawn financial pattern is characterized by profound, paralyzing disengagement. They find the very concept of money, debt, and societal financial structures so incredibly overwhelming that they simply ignore them.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of dread when looking at a bill, but this is on a pathological level, right?
It is a physical paralysis. Imagine boy B going to his mailbox. He sees an envelope from a credit card company or a utility provider. His hyperreactive amygdala fires off the same alarm bells as if he were facing a physical predator.
Just from a piece of mail.
The anxiety is so intense that the only way to regulate his nervous system is to drop the envelope on the counter unopened. The envelopes pile up, the late fees accumulate, the power gets shut off.
But he knows it's happening, right?
He experiences the cognitive dissonance of knowing he is ruining his credit and his life, but he is biologically paralyzed from opening a piece of paper. It is a form of extreme self-protection from the anxiety of potential failure.
It is incredible. It's like the beggar archetype is just ignoring his credit card bill so he doesn't have to face the machinery of society, while the warrior is hoarding gold and controlling all the passwords to the bank accounts to make absolutely sure his wife can never leave him.
That is a perfect distillation of the dynamic, and this financial behavior feeds directly into the larger systemic cycle of poverty and violence.
How so?
Low socioeconomic status is a brutal trap because it acts as both a cause and a consequence of these temperaments.
Break that down for me. How is poverty both a cause and a consequence?
For our first boy, the aggressive male, poverty acts as a massive environmental strain. The lack of resources constantly triggers his fast life history strategy.
Right, tells him he's in danger.
It signals that the environment is unsafe, which fuels his aggressive, antagonistic behavior. That often leads to criminality or job loss, keeping him trapped in poverty. That is poverty as a cause.
And for the withdrawn boy?
Conversely, for the withdrawn male, poverty is often the result of his social alienation. His inability to advocate for himself, his paralysis regarding bills, and his chronic disengagement from the workforce inevitably lead to a slow slide into destitution.
So we have explored a massive amount of theory today. We've looked at the neurobiology of the HPA axis, evolutionary strategies, the cultural straitjacket of masculinity, ancient myths, and modern finance.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But what is the actual verdict? When researchers step back and look at real human lives over the course of decades, what do the hard numbers say about these two boys? Where do they end up?
To answer that, the paper leans heavily on empirical data from the Concordia Longitudinal Risk Project.
Concordia.
This was an exhaustive, massive study that screened over 4,000 children and followed their trajectories for decades into adulthood. The data is unflinching and sobering.
What does it say?
Childhood aggression. The path of our first boy strongly and consistently predicts a cluster of severe adult dysfunctions. We are talking about significantly higher rates of high school dropout, teen pregnancy, chronic reliance on social welfare, and even a higher likelihood of dangerous driving resulting in accidents.
So the fast strategy weed burns out exactly as the evolutionary model predicted.
Unfortunately, yes.
But what about the withdrawn kids? Our second boy hiding in stealth mode. Are they doomed to a life of destitution and isolation?
This is where the data reveals a truly fascinating nuance, and it centers on something called the likability factor.
Likability, like just being a nice guy.
The researchers found that social withdrawal alone does not guarantee a doomed trajectory. If a withdrawn boy happens to possess a baseline likability, meaning if he is quiet but gentle, perhaps socially awkward but generally pleasant and non-threatening to be around, that likability acts as a massive moderating protective factor.
So if you're going to hide, it pays to be polite.
Essentially, yes. This likability allows the withdrawn boy to successfully navigate the margins of society. Teachers might give him a little extra grace, peers might not invite him to parties but they won't bully him, and employers might find him to be a reliable, if quiet, worker. He can find a stable, low-conflict niche in adulthood.
Wait, so the quiet kid can actually be okay as long as he's nice. What about the aggressive kid? If our first boy is aggressive but also highly charismatic and likable like a smooth-talking, hot-tempered guy, does his likability save him?
No! And that is the ultimate tragedy of the hot temper. The data shows that the aggressive male faces a massive 2.5 times higher relative risk of developing severe psychiatric disorders in adulthood.
2.5 times higher.
And that risk remains regardless of his likability.
So charm cannot outrun biology.
It cannot. Even if he is charismatic, the underlying neurobiological engine of aggression, the broken reward system, and the blunted amygdala eventually derail his life. The structural damage to his relationships and his environment simply accumulates until it collapses.
If the aggressive path is that statistically doomed, and the withdrawn path relies on the sheer luck of being likable, are we just reading a life sentence here?
I know it sounds grim.
Yeah. If a listener knows a child who has been abandoned and is showing these temperaments, is it game over? Or is there a way to break the cycle?
There is absolutely hope, and it lies in targeted early intervention. The paper highlights landmark studies like the Fast Track program.
Fast track.
These studies focus on children who have developed what researchers call a defensive mindset due to early trauma children whose brains are locked into the fast life strategy or extreme withdrawal. What Fast Track proved is that by intensely targeting interpersonal and intrapersonal skills early in life, you can significantly alter their trajectory.
What does that intervention actually look like? Are we just teaching them manners?
It is much deeper than manners. It is about rewiring the brain. For the hot-tempered child, it involves intensive coaching in emotional regulation.
Teaching them to use brakes.
Yes, teaching them to pause and identify the physical sensations of frustration before they lash out, essentially helping to build the brakes in their prefrontal cortex that trauma failed to install.
And for the withdrawn kid.
For the withdrawn child, it involves safe, highly structured social engagement, gently coaxing them out of camouflage and proving to their hyperreactive amygdala that the world is not always a lethal threat.
And does it work?
The longitudinal results are staggering. By age 31, children who went through these intervention programs showed vastly improved life outcomes compared to the control group. Lower rates of criminality, higher rates of employment, and better psychiatric health.
That is the beauty of neuroplasticity. The brain survival filters, the blunted amygdala, the hyperreactive vagal brake, the defensive mindset. They are not permanent, concrete, biological life sentences if they're addressed early enough.
Exactly.
The brain learned to be terrified, which means the brain can learn to be safe.
With the right integrated practices, we can dismantle those ancient alarms. But it requires society to look past the disruptive behavior and see the terrified child operating the machinery.
Let's try to wrap our heads around the massive journey we've taken today. We started with 2 boys and a shared tragedy.
Right.
What we've learned is that childhood abandonment is a universal stressor that fundamentally physically programs the developing male brain for survival. But the exact flavor of that survival, whether a boy becomes a warrior fighting the world or a beggar hiding from it, is not random.
It's highly calculated.
It's dictated by an innate temperamental filter, an incredibly complex blend of HPA-axis neurobiology, ancient evolutionary strategies, and the suffocating cultural scripts about what it means to be a man.
Understanding that intricate filter is the only way we can move as a society, from simple judgment to genuine, effective intervention.
As we close, I want to leave you with a lingering, provocative question to ponder throughout your week. Think about the intensely aggressive, highly successful people you see in our society.
The ones who always have to win.
Exactly. The ruthless corporate CEOs, the relentless cutthroat competitors, the guys who have to win every single negotiation at all costs and dominate every room they walk into. What if some of that so-called success is just a socially rewarded, highly polished version of the warrior's anxious financial pattern?
It's a fascinating thought.
Where exactly do we draw the line between a highly driven professional and a completely unhealed trauma survivor acting out an ancient survival script? Thank you for joining us in this deep dive on Today in the Hypothesis. If this shifted your perspective on how we develop, how we love, and how we survive, please subscribe to the show and share this deep dive with someone who loves peeling back the hidden layers of human behavior. See you next time.